of India and the US president will sit down for a virtual meeting in just a few hours from now. It comes as the defence and foreign ministers from both the nations are preparing for the annual meeting known as the 2+2 dialogue. India's Foreign Minister Anand Jaishankar and Defence Minister Rajnath Singh have arrived in Washington, D.C. for the talks. The Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin from the US will hold in-person talks with their Indian counterparts on a range of issues. The 2+2 dialogue was launched in 2018 to deepen cooperation between the United States and India. The forum has also focused on improving bilateral relations and cooperation in Asia. It's part of Washington's strategy to counterweight China by having another ally in the region. The nations have almost always been on the same page, but this has changed since Russia invaded Ukraine. Ahead of the talks, New Delhi's press release has the usual statements about strengthening the comprehensive global strategic partnership with the United States. But Washington has a slightly different tone. The White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki has released a statement on the upcoming 2+2 talks where she mentions that mitigating the destabilizing impacts of Russia's war against Ukraine, that's a quote from her. India and the US have had differing views over Ukraine since the war began in February. And while New Delhi has condemned the invasion and the brutality, it hasn't directly criticised Moscow. It's also abstained from all United Nations votes against Russia. India's accepted discounted oil prices offered by Russian firms after strict Western sanctions and embargoes. And it's received subtle warnings from the Deputy Treasury Secretary of the United States last week. Well, our correspondent Susan Tehrani is joining us now live from New York. Susan, what will be on President Biden's agenda when he speaks with Narendra Modi?
Well, as you rightly noted, we had a press released by Jen Psaki and the White House, and there was a slew of issues mentioned in that press release. It was interesting that the issue of COVID was also mentioned as it should be, so mitigating those challenges well, and a reminder that, of course, the COVID challenge is indeed with us and is something that the Biden administration and also Prime Minister Modi want to stress on. The issue of Indo-Pacific really high up on the agenda, but it was also noteworthy that a supply chain crisis and a food shortage issue is something that both sides are very concerned about due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and that will also be on the agenda. That talk and that conversation is going to proceed, as you mentioned, a 2+2 meeting from the foreign minister of India and the defense minister with their counterparts here in the United States. And of course, that is also going to focus on the Indo-Pacific region, and a visit by the Indian defense minister to Hawaii, which is also a base for the Indo-PACOM, the largest and oldest combatant command, which is in charge of the Indo-Pacific region. So we know that President Biden and Prime Minister Modi will focus on that issue as well.
And what about this dispute, this difference of opinion over Russian oil? Is that going to compromise the Indo-US relationship? And how will Biden and Modi approach that in these talks?
Well, I think both sides have a strategic alliance, and they understand each other's position pretty well. I think President Biden and the West generally will have to understand that national interests of each country really come first in a lot of senses. And on the other hand, I think that they also would like to get as much verbal support as possible when it comes to dealing with Russia. Whether or not that's possible or not is another question. I mean, there are a lot of countries in Europe that they haven't been able to really get that kind of outspoken and verbal support from either. But I think because there is so much common ground between the two sides, we're really not going to see any kind of eruption, obviously. But on the other hand, I think that both men and both leaders know where both sides stand, and I think there's more common ground to focus on than differences. And I think that's, with everything that's happening right now and the challenges that both countries, as the biggest democracies that they're facing, I think they're going to be wise to focus on those.
Susan Tehrani in New York, thank you.